the question is really like, what about the opposition? Like, and particularly like, should we be excited by them? I mean, do they even have a real chance here, or is the system just rigged against them? And is it maybe perhaps also part of their own fault?
Okay. I wouldn't. Okay, yes. Okay, so I wouldn't blame the opposition necessarily, because they have, in most cases, they have been victims of the crackdown by the state. So I, in most cases, sympathize with them, because when violence is done to any human being, of course, as Che Guevara taught us, we should all tremble. So it's something that we should oppose, especially the state's use of unnecessary terror and coercion against opposition and activist figures, because it's threatening. But again, that does not make them progressive. So we should all join hands to try and limit the state's use of power. And as I have always argued, the use of power against the opposition and members of activists in the civil society is not new. It has been extreme under Magufuli, but it's not exception. Not in Africa, not in Tanzania, during all the time, spanning back to the Nyerere era and to the present. And why is that? It's because we inherited a colonial state. This state was about quashing any opposition against it, whether it's labor, whether it's opposition parties, and etc. So there's a whole legacy of authoritarianism, which is not, as the Western media is trying to portray, which is not individual in terms of Magufuli, because even when you change the leader, there is nothing that changes in terms of, if you don't dismantle the colonial state. And then secondly, Magufuli accused, and I think rightly so, the opposition as being stooges of imperialism. And if you look at the opposition, let's say the role of Kabwe, because in most cases, the West, he is very good at playing the West. In the morning, he can go and have breakfast with Jeremy Corbyn. And in the evening, he goes to the World Bank and asks them to put sanctions against Tanzania. So he plays a very controversial role, internally, domestically, but also externally, you know. So, but you know, he has been able to play the West, so that Hillary Clinton invites him to New York. At the same time, the Jacobin, for instance, website writes all articles that he's on the left, while he's not. He's against the state, and his progressive stance is that of fighting authoritarianism. And that authoritarianism, I am saying, it's extreme under Magufuli, but not exception. So let's go to the opposition. Does it offer any hope? My answer is no, it doesn't. Partly because look at Tundu Lissu. He has been a victim of an attempted assassination, which we all condemned. He went, of course, abroad for treatment. But after that, he was embraced by extremely right-wing organizations, from NGOs to imperialist governments, whether it's the US State Department, and I believe CIA, and all the extreme right-wing organizations, and some of them even racist. Okay, look at the role of Robert Amsterdam on Tanzania. This is an individual writing letters, almost imperialist threats on the leaders of a southern nation. If you look at it, there are elements of racism inside it. He has been endorsed by the UDI. The UDI is a right-wing organization. It was started, actually, it's a creation of Thatcher and Reagan, you know, and all the conservative figures and parties are part of that. And it has endorsed Tundu Lissu. In his international crusade, for instance, he has promised, one of his critics against him, insistent on that, is that he has destroyed the business environment, you know, the trust on investors. He has destroyed the good relations that existed between the Kikwete era when it comes to economic policy and liberalization. There is no hope in that, you know. So yes, we should support the opposition and sympathize with them, especially when they face violence from the state. But when it comes to policy, and that has been my argument, I was addressing, I have been invited to two assemblies of the largest peasant organization in Eastern Central Africa, that is in Viwata, which is in Tanzania. And my argument has been the working people should have their independent organizations that are not affiliated to any political party, because unfortunately there's no leftist political party in Tanzania at the moment. And then secondly, they should have their own independent agenda. They should push it. Whoever comes to power should implement that agenda. If they don't do that, then they will be doomed. For our comrades in the West, some of them like they have very good intentions, but it seems they don't get the reality on the ground, you know, for most things. So in most cases, some are confused. On the one hand, there is a moral imperative to intervene, which is very good, but beware, because when you intervene without specifying the context, you know, one is that the state does not, it uses extreme force. Does not use sheer force. The regime is popular with the working people, you know. When it comes to small-scale miners, most of them who were evicted to make way for large-scale miners, he has delivered justice to them. He has revoked foreign companies, and therefore is very popular in some rural areas where people had been dispossessed of their land. And his major legacy when it comes to democratic gain has been the granting of the rights to the city to street vendors. That has been very progressive. And in our definition of democracy, we have only defined democracy in terms of middle class aspirations and definitions. We have never included the realities of the masses in our definition of democracy. So if you talk to street vendors, and in one of my articles I wrote on Tanzania elections, I quoted a newspaper, a very right-wing newspaper that is not a fan of the current regime, but when it went to interview street vendors on Magufuli, they say we were being chased away like dogs, but now we are free to operate anywhere in the city. Is the right to the city for democratic opening. So our definition of democracy should be broad, and I think the working people should be, they should organize, have an independent agenda, and push it. Magufuli has been very consistent when it comes to his relationship to the working people. He has never, when he was campaigning in 2015, he was telling the people, mniamini, trust me, you have to believe in me, trust me. When he came to power, he was saying, pray for me, mniombe. He never said, take this power and put it in your hands. No. So he has been very consistent when it comes to putting power in his hands from all organs, whether it's from the judiciary, whether it's from the parliament, whether it's from the working people, whether it's from trade unions. So we shouldn't have very high hopes in terms of, you know, in terms of justifying his role. But then it's a complicated relationship between him and the working people, and he's still very popular. But again, Tundu Lissu also is gaining a lot of popularity. When he came back to Tanzania, for instance, in his campaigns, I was amazed that when he went to the rural areas, actually, he had to talk about nationalizing the land. When he was talking to the national media, he was saying Magufuli is the threat to international media because he's pursuing nationalistic policies. But when he went back to the working people and find their reality, he had to talk about nationalization. So in some cases, so I found that it's possible for the working people to push these candidates to articulate their agenda. Is the election going to be free and fair? I think that's one of the questions that our comrades, especially those who live out of Tanzania, would ask. I don't have the answer. There are signs of hope and signs of threat, both ways. But let's hope for the best. And I still see that probably the current President Magufuli will still be elected, whether by both ways, either by using state power, but he's still also very popular, even if he didn't have to use state power to get votes on his side. he would still win. But again, what about the opposition? What about members of the opposition who win constituencies? Are they going to be declared as winners? What about councillors and city governments? That remains to be seen.